today's news.
Hello, welcome to Old News, the programme and podcast which looks at news stories of the day through the papers and press of yesterday. This week, I thought we'd look at population. It's been back in the news recently with claims that the government probably won't hit their desired for increase in population by the desired date. I think we're looking at 30,000 or so in the next few years. Will we? Won't we? Who knows? The population has always been something of a hot potato when it comes to the Isle of Man. Whether there are too many or too few. Used to be too many a few years ago, I seem to recall we were concerned about. So I thought I'd have a delve back into the archives. A fair way back to start, the Isle of Man Examiner, Saturday, December the 29th, 1900. Probably in the year 1801, says the article, not a fifth of the population of the island could read or write. We have changed all that, and in the year of our grace, which will close on Monday next at midnight, the percentage of illiterates in the island is so small a figure, something like 2 or 3%, as to be hardly worth noticing. The population of the island in the first year of that century was 28,000, that of Douglas being 3,650. It is safe to estimate that when the census returns are completed next year, it will be found that the population of the island will turn out to be something like 57,000, while that of Douglas will be 23,000 if Greater Douglas be taken, 25,000. Which makes you think straight off, doesn't it? The population of the island in 1901, 57,000. And 120 years later, it's managed to increase by about 30,000. And we're aiming to grow it by 30,000 in, about 10 years or so. Well, we skip to the Ramsey Courier, Friday, May the 29th, 1931. What the census reveals, it reveals the island population is down. The provisional figures of the Manx census showed a total resident population of 48,352 in 1931, which is a decrease of 726 on the year 1921. Ramsey showed an increase of 48. Didn't get too far there, did we? In the Mona's Herald of Tuesday, July the 27th, 1937, do you know, says the article, the population of the Isle of Man, according to the 1931 census, was smaller than it was 80 years before. So we'd gone backwards. In 1931, the population, 49,338, made up of 22,489 males, 26,849 females. In 1851, the island had a census population of 52,116. Females predominated then as now and numbered 27,563 compared with 24,553 males. In the previous 30 years, the population had grown by nearly 12,000. In 1821, the population numbered 40,081. By 1841, it had grown to 47,975. Again, 1851, over 52,000 people on the Isle of Man. It does make you wonder whether, if we do succeed to grow the island by 30,000 in 15 years or so, would that be the most rapid expansion of the island's population ever seen? I think it might be. The Times, Isle of Man Times, Saturday, July the 14th, 1951. Island population increased 5,000 up on the 1931 figure, we're told. A census shows a drift to the towns. Provisional figures for the census taken on April the 8th of 1931 show that the population of the island on that day was 54,499, an increase of 5,191 over the figure for the previous census of 1931. Of these, 25,086 were males, 29,413 females, the females outnumbering the males by 4,327. So, it is remarked, the island hardly lives up to its name. There have been changes in some cases, startling changes in the distribution of the island's people over the past 20 years, the most amazing being the growth of Onken village. In 1931, the population was 1,715. This year it was 3,359, an increase of 2,644, making the village the third largest local government area in 1931. Onken displaces Peel, which had a slight increase, from 2,477 to 2,582 over the past 20 years. The other village districts have also grown considerably. Since 1931, Port Erin has increased to 1,435. The Port St Mary from 1,166 to 1,399, Laxey from 1,296 to 1,341, and Michael from 333 to 370. Remember, this is July of 1951. And Douglas topped the 20,000 mark. The town population showed increases. Douglas now 20,288 inhabitants compared with 19,328 in 1931. And Ramsey, the second largest town, has risen from 4,198 to 4,607. The same year, 1951, the Isle of Man Examiner. The island's population, 54,499. Onken is the third largest residential area. The island's population is, according to the provisional census figures this week, 54,499, 5,191 more than the previous count those 20 years ago. Only in Bride, Jerby, Marown and Santon, it is remarked, were there more men than women. The population of the countryside shows little change with the returns of the counts of 1931 and 21. Most noticeable changes are in Lezayre, where the population has increased from 1,141 to 1,349, and Andres from 997 to 1,095. The population in Douglas was smaller than it was 30 years ago, when the total was 20,326. Skipping forward 3 years to 1954, the Isle of Man Examiner of Friday, July the 30th. The island's population doubled. It looks like a great headline, and you think, good Lord, that's very fast, until you realise it's to do with visitors. Estimated at 32,000, the number of visitors who arrived by sea at the weekend is about equal to the corresponding period a year ago. In addition, 3,307 arrived by air, 325 more than at the same weekend last year. For accommodation, this week marks the peak of the season, for besides the new arrivals on Saturday and Sunday, it is reckoned that about half the 33,000 crowd who came the previous weekend stayed on. This means, in heavy type, that around 50,000 holidaymakers have been on the island this week, about doubling the normal population, and that's 1954. Inquiries at the Tourist Board offices last weekend went on from 5 a.m. on Saturday until 11 p.m, and the board staff met all last-minute demands for accommodation, finding room for over 600 people, about 300 fewer than last year. I think we'd be quite happy with 50,000 over a weekend or so, wouldn't we, these days? The Isle of Man Times, Friday the 8th of February 1957, the island's population rose to over 55,000 in 1951, and only 355 spoke Manx. That's a drop of 174 in 20 years. As we've already heard, many more women than men, but the margin decreases. And, interestingly, a sign of the times, fewer domestics and 3 times as many typists. The article goes on, the population of the island increased by almost 6,000 persons during the 20-year period, 1931 to 51, so that's a 6,000 increase over 20 years. I'm just getting back to what we're aiming to do these days. And only 355 spoke Manx, a decrease of 174 in 20 years. The 1951 census, published this week, shows that the total population enumerated then was 55,253. It was estimated that 55,437 persons were usually resident here at the census date. The figures are higher than those given several years ago for the 1951 census, but the latest is the correct figure. Some revealing figures are given concerning the flight of agricultural workers from the island and the reluctance of modern girls to take up domestic service. The report says that the number of girls working in offices had trebled, whilst there were twice as many men engaged in building and allied trades. It was also disclosed that we live a little longer than the people of England and Wales. Of the total population, 13.9% were aged 65 and over, compared with 11% in the other countries. The island percentage was 10.9 in 1931. Lots of details given in this long article. Marrying younger, the most significant feature of the distributions by marital condition is the increase since 1931 in the proportions married, particularly in the younger age groups. At age 20 to 24, there were 169 males married per thousand, as compared with only 96 in 1931, and 401 females per thousand, compared with 169. The number of females continues to be greater than that of males, a sign of the times. And then, interestingly, with the Manx language, which, as we know, has had a wonderful resurgence in recent years, in 1957, the year in question, the number of people able to speak Manx continues to decrease. The number was 355, a drop of 174 on the figure 20 years before. In 1901, the language was spoken by 4,647 people, and by 915 only in 1921. The reduction between 1931 and 1951 occurred largely among persons aged 65 and over, and in the age group 303 people could speak Manx in 1931, only 96 in 1951. We're also told, as was mentioned in the headline, the proportion of occupied women engaged in personal service, that's domestics as they were known, fell from 57% to 46% in the 20-year period. There was also a decrease in the 1931-51 period in the numbers of women owners or manageresses of restaurants, hotels, etc. The second largest group of female occupations comprises those connected with commerce and finance and such like, in which 1,200 or 18% of the total were engaged. Female clerks and typists, another sign of the times, nearly trebled in numbers during the 1931 to 51 period. And the industries in which the largest number of persons were engaged were the miscellaneous services, about 20% of the gainfully occupied persons, the distributive trades, 14%, and building and contracting, 13%. Only around 11% of the total gainfully occupied population were engaged in agriculture and fishing, etc. So just 11% as far back as 1957 involved in agriculture. I dare say the figure is lower now. Isle of Women was the headline in the Holiday News of Saturday, August the 9th, 1958. Visitors to the Isle of Man will be intrigued to learn that there are considerably more women than men in the resident population. The population of the island differs from that of Great Britain in both age and sex constitution. Very little statistical information is available on the subject of migration to and from the island. What there is indicates there has been considerable movement both in and out, but that the net effect on the size of the population over the first half of this century has been negligible. Strangely enough, we are told the size of the population of the island has varied very little over the past 100 years, and that was 1958. And finally, we look at 1961, where the headline in the Ramsey Courier of May the 19th was "Population Shock," and the shock was it was down by 7,000. The provisional figures of the island's population following the census taken on April the 23rd shows a total of 48,150. This compares with 55,251 in 1951 and 50,829 in 1939. The figures are the lowest for many years. Comparative figures of the past are as follows, and it makes interesting reading. 1726, 14,066 people on the island. 1757, 19,144. 1784, 24,924. 1821, 40,081. 1931, 41,758. 1841, 47,986. 1851, 52,387. and 1861, 52,252, and in 1961, 48,150. I think the target for the Isle of Man currently is 100,000 in just a few years. It's an ambitious target, it would have to be said, by any stretch of the imagination. It remains to be seen if we get anywhere near it. But if you look at the figures going past over the last 150 years, it would be very easy to be sceptical. I'll leave it at that. Whichever way you look at it, the population, at least every 10 years, has been a regular in the Isle of Man press. It is, of course, old news, whether it goes up or down. That's about it for this week. In the meantime, I'll see you next week. Cheerio.
You're gonna be yesterday's news.